Welcome to Echo No More, clear, credible, court-ready documentation in high-conflict parenting. No hype, no legal jargon, no drama. I'm Dr. James. If you're new here, I'm really glad you found this space. This podcast is for protective parents navigating high-conflict custody situations, especially when the other parent is manipulative, emotionally unsafe, or unpredictable. I'm not a lawyer, and this podcast isn't legal advice. What I am is a parent who has lived through this system, and someone whose attorneys over and over again told me the same thing. Your documentation is excellent. They told me it made their job easier. They told me it protected my credibility. And they told me it changed how my case was received. That's why I'm sharing this. Not to teach you how to fight, but how to document calmly, clearly, and in a way courts actually understand. This is parent to parent, calm, grounded, and focused on protecting your child without losing yourself. There's something that feels deeply unfair about the way courts respond to calmness, because for many protective parents, calm is not how you feel inside. Inside, you feel afraid, angry, alert, on edge, exhausted. So, when someone says you need to stay calm, it can sound like they're minimizing what you've been through. I want to be very clear about something before we go any further. Being calm does not mean you weren't harmed. Being regulated does not mean you agree. Being composed does not mean you're compliant or passive. In court-involved situations, calm is not a personality trait. Calm is your credibility. My attorneys didn't praise my documentation because it was unemotional. They praised it because it was steady, predictable, consistent, grounded. That steadiness communicated something I wasn't even trying to say. This parent can observe, pause, and respond even under pressure. That message matters more than most parents realize. Courts are constantly evaluating not just what is written, but how it's written. Tone is not neutral. Tone communicates regulation, or the lack of it. And this regulation shows up on paper even when you don't see emotional words. It shows up in urgency, in length, in repetition, in escalating language over time, in documenting things that don't actually matter. Again, this does not mean the emotion is wrong. It means documentation is not the place for that emotion to live. Here's something that surprised me early on. I assumed credibility came from passion, from clearly conveying how serious things were. But in practice, passion on paper often reads as instability, even when it's justified. Calm documentation, on the other hand, reads as control. And courts trust control. That doesn't mean they trust the calm parent more because they like them. They trust the calm parent because calm suggests consistency, perspective, reliability, and capacity. Those are qualities courts associate with safe parenting. This is where things get especially hard for trauma-exposed parents. Because trauma responses often include things like hypervigilance, a sense of urgency, difficulty letting things go, a need to get it down immediately. Those responses are protective. They kept you functioning. But when they drive your documentation, they can quietly undermine the very thing you're trying to protect. I want you to hear this clearly. Your nervous system writes even when you don't realize it. You can remove emotional language and still sound dysregulated, and the court will feel that even if it can't articulate why. This is why emotional regulation is not just about self-care. It is a strategic skill. Calm documentation does not mean waiting until you feel fine. It means waiting until you feel steady enough. It means not documenting while your heart is racing. It means not writing while you're trying to discharge emotion. It means not using documentation to stabilize yourself. That's not because you don't deserve support. It's because documentation is not a safe place for your nervous system to land. Once I stopped writing while activated, several things changed. My entries got shorter, my tone stabilized, my confidence increased, and my attorneys stopped needing to reframe everything I wrote. That wasn't because the situation improved, it was because my regulation improved. Calm documentation also protects your child. When documentation is regulated, the focus stays on patterns, impact, outcomes. When documentation is dysregulated, the focus drifts toward conflict. And courts are always watching to see which parent keeps the focus on the child. Let me say something that may feel uncomfortable but is very important. Courts equate regulation with safety, not fairness, not morality, safety. A regulated parent is seen as someone who can manage stress without collapsing or escalating. That perception matters. And again, this is not about suppressing emotion. It's about choosing where emotion goes. You deserve places where you can rage, cry, process, and fall apart. Documentation just isn't one of those places. Once I accepted that, calm documentation stopped feeling like a performance and started feeling like relief. Because calm documentation doesn't require you to relive everything. It requires you to observe. And observation is far less exhausting than re-experiencing. Calm documentation is not a weakness. It is restraint in service of clarity. And clarity is what courts respond to. Before we close, I want to remind you of something important. You don't need to document everything. You don't need to be perfect. And you don't need to convince anyone with emotion. Calm documentation is power. If this episode helped you, you will find a full structured system in my guide, Clear, Credible, Court Ready. It's designed to support, not replace, your attorney. And if you want help turning everything you're documenting into something organized and usable, you can visit www.economocoaching.org to download my guide on how to create a clear, court-ready documentation binder. Take what helps, leave what doesn't, and most of all, take care of yourself. I'll see you next week.